Typically, when an adult disappears for several days, an entire community takes part in the search. And when that person is eventually discovered in a wooded area, investigators at the scene can often establish what happened relatively quickly. This case, however, was different. The unanswered questions were only beginning to grow for investigators there. The normal process produced no answers, while even forensic specialists found themselves confronting more questions than explanations. To grasp just how extensive this search became, you have to examine what was unfolding in Lexington, South Carolina by mid-June 2026. On June 15th, law enforcement began one of the largest coordinated search efforts the area had ever seen. The Lexington Police Department, the Lexington County Sheriff's Department, fire and rescue crews, emergency medical services, the Department of Natural Resources, and South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. All of them worked together. Drones repeatedly surveyed the dense wooded area along Common Farm Lane, directly behind the shopping district where the Lowe's store and Planet Fitness are located. At that point, Police Chief Terrence Green told reporters this was not a recovery operation. Rather, he characterized it as a careful attempt to systematically rule out one potential search area. After hours of work involving dozens of specialists, the outcome remained unchanged. There wasn't one meaningful lead. The next day, June 16th, another strange development emerged. Rumors quickly circulated throughout the community, alleging that the missing woman had already been located. The police department had to release an official statement rejecting the claims and publicly apologized for the confusion. During that surge of misinformation, investigators received a call from a local resident. The caller said they had seen the missing woman near Lakeside Middle School on Old Cherokee Road. What made the tip particularly intriguing was a significant contradiction. The caller said the sighting occurred sometime between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. Yet, according to the official timeline, the woman did not enter the gym until 6:40 p.m. Investigators have never publicly explained that discrepancy. Still, that strange phone call became the first development to finally push the stalled investigation ahead. On June 17th at 1:30 p.m., search teams moved into a wooded area near 455 Old Cherokee Road. The site was nearly 2 miles from the initial search zone. A little over an hour later at 2:48 p.m., Police Chief Terrence Green and Sheriff Jay Kuhn approached the microphones and delivered the announcement everyone had been awaiting. The search was officially finished. The woman who had been found was wearing an olive green zip-up hoodie and black athletic pants that matched the clothing described in the missing person bulletin. Soon afterward, the Lexington County Coroner's Office officially verified her identity. The woman discovered in the woods was 39-year-old Elena Catherine Moore. It appeared the case had finally reached its conclusion. Yet on June 20th, Elena's body was transported to the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston for a complete forensic examination. 2 days later, Lexington County Coroner Margaret Fisher announced the preliminary findings, and they completely surprised investigators. There was not one indication of physical aggression on Elena's body. The medical examiner found absolutely no external injuries. No bruises, no scrapes, no bleeding beneath the skin, no stab wounds or gunshot injuries, no evidence of strangulation or blunt force trauma. Externally, her body appeared entirely untouched. The official cause of death was recorded as undetermined. Consider that for a moment. How physically possible is it for someone to vanish without a trace from a busy part of town, undergo an extensive search by air and ground teams, and then be discovered dead with almost no visible injuries? This is a genuine forensic mystery. Only weeks before she was found in those woods, this healthy, physically strong woman had openly told close friends that she was afraid for her safety. Something or someone caused her heart to stop without leaving even one mark on her skin. To understand how investigators eventually confronted that question, we first need to examine what her ordinary life was actually like. To grasp the nature of this strange case, we need to step back and examine Elena's everyday life more closely. To those around her, she seemed successful, exceptionally energetic, and perpetually busy. She managed 3 separate jobs simultaneously. She worked as a pharmacy technician at a local CVS pharmacy, frequently bartended at several nearby establishments, and also served as a highly sought-after personal trainer at Wolf's Fitness Center. Each day, she encountered dozens of people from every walk of life. She encouraged clients to grow stronger, urged them to push beyond their limits, and consistently displayed confidence and resolve. From the outside, she seemed like someone who had her entire life under control. Yet inside the walls of her home, things looked very different. She had been involved with Brandon Slice for 13 years. Interestingly, they did not officially marry until 2024. Most people regard a relationship lasting that long as evidence of stability and trust. In this situation, however, those years slowly created a barrier of isolation around Elena. One detail stands out to me above everything else. She was a financially independent woman holding 3 jobs, yet she lacked unrestricted access to her own vehicle. Brandon always controlled the car. He drove her to her morning shifts and collected her after work each evening. Consider that for a moment. A personal trainer physically capable of handling demanding workouts every day had been denied one of the most basic forms of independence in daily life, the ability to travel wherever she wanted by herself. Her entire routine depended on her husband's schedule. The earliest efforts to escape that suffocating pattern started well before the events of May. In 2017, when Elena and Brandon had been together for roughly 5 years, she was already developing serious plans to leave. A close family friend, Ashton Jeffcoat, later saved screenshots from their private Facebook Messenger conversations during that period. In those exchanges, Elena openly discussed her resolve to permanently end the relationship. She was searching for a roommate so she could lease an apartment and move away. But that departure never occurred. Somehow, the cycle drew her back, as another close friend, Lauren Beasley, later told investigators and reporters. This was not merely one argument or a difficult period. It had developed into a damaging pattern that repeated for years. Their relationship kept following the same cycle again and again. Tension would accumulate. Elena would eventually reach a point where she desperately wanted out. Then came an apparent reconciliation, accompanied by the belief that things were finally improving. Yet soon enough, the control returned, even stronger than before. It became a draining psychological trap, one that is extraordinarily difficult to escape without help. The first significant warning sign, though almost no one around her understood it then, surfaced roughly a month before her disappearance. She was someone whose entire existence centered on other people. She held 3 intensely social jobs, remained constantly connected, and communicated with others every day. Then, almost overnight, she vanished from social media entirely. She did not merely post less frequently. She became completely silent online. For someone who had always maintained such an open, active life, this was entirely unlike her. What strikes me most is how easy it can be to miss the signs when someone we know suddenly becomes quiet. Most of us assume they're simply exhausted or taking time away from social media. But Elena's silence in May was not an ordinary digital break. It reflected someone who had reached a dead end, someone carrying years of emotional strain that had finally reached a breaking point. That breaking point arrived on May 31st. At first glance, it appeared to be a routine brunch at a local restaurant. Several friends sat together around the table, including Sandra Campbell, who had known Elena for more than 10 years. Forget the strong, confident motivator everyone knew from the gym. That day, the people with her saw behavior that was completely unlike her. For years, that was the version of Elena people knew. Active, capable, dependable, and seemingly comfortable around others. Nothing about her routine suggested that she was struggling behind the scenes. Yet the contrast between that image and her private circumstances would become difficult to ignore as time passed quickly. Elena seemed unable to physically unwind. While everyone around her chatted and laughed, she repeatedly rose from the table. She kept moving toward the entrance, peering through the windows, surveying the dining room, and tracking each person who entered through the door. Her posture and relentless alertness pointed to someone convinced that danger might emerge at any moment, desperately attempting to remain conscious of everything happening around her. Sandra could see how nervous Elena was, but she decided against mentioning it in front of the group. A busy restaurant was hardly the right setting for such a conversation. Everything shifted as they prepared to leave. During their goodbye, Elena firmly took Sandra's hand, pulled her away from the crowd, and spoke more quietly. She wasn't kidding. She wasn't overstating anything. Looking straight at Sandra, she said, "I'm afraid for my life. The situation is out of control, and you don't even know half of what's really going on." They both agreed to speak afterward in a private place where Elena could tell her everything. That discussion never took place. On June 4th, Sandra failed to answer a call from Elena, and that same day, the investigation suddenly changed direction, leaving behind a troubling digital trail. I went through the doorbell footage investigators had gathered piece by piece from that Thursday, and what stood out most was the progression of Elena's behavior. The earliest documented incident occurred outside John Moore's home, roughly half a mile from Wolf's Fitness Center. The camera showed Elena stepping onto the front porch and collecting a food delivery that had been left there. John saw what was happening and opened his front door. Without speaking and without displaying aggression, Elena returned the order to him. Then she did something completely inexplicable. She attempted to walk into his house behind him. Moore later told investigators she seemed profoundly confused and appeared not to know where she was. Roughly an hour later, a different security camera recorded her on a nearby street. Local resident Sarah Burleson walked outside and discovered a stranger methodically searching through packages delivered to her front porch. Naturally, she asked, "What are you doing on my porch?" Elena gave a disturbing answer. "Honestly, I have no idea." Around that same period, Police Inspector Missy Silcox confirmed investigators had another surveillance recording. This time, cameras outside a Kohl's store showed the same faraway, unfocused expression and the same apparently purposeless, confused movements. This is where the investigation makes a dramatic shift, because we're now confronted with two sharply different explanations for what might have occurred. Details from anonymous sources started appearing in the media. Those reports claimed that after Elena had been spotted wandering through several neighborhoods, law enforcement supposedly transported her to Three Rivers Behavioral Health for a psychiatric evaluation. Numerous news organizations quickly emphasized that possibility, suggesting her conduct might have been caused by an unexpected mental health crisis. Sandra Campbell, however, firmly and publicly dismissed that explanation. She said nothing had ever been hidden between them. According to Sandra, Elena had only ever dealt with normal anxiety, not serious psychiatric episodes severe enough to require hospitalization. When those two conflicting accounts are placed side by side, one thing becomes especially noticeable. It's easy to call someone unstable after watching them take a stranger's pizza from a front porch. But when you remember the fear Elena displayed during that brunch, the overall picture begins to seem very different. And that distinction matters, because the events of that day cannot be understood apart from her earlier warning. What we're seeing isn't merely unusual behavior. What we're witnessing is the slow breakdown of someone's ability to cope after enduring relentless pressure for years. Behavior that seemed irrational to passing witnesses may instead have been the outward expression of overwhelming emotional strain that had finally driven her past her limits. By then, her grasp of reality already appeared to be weakening. Now, move forward exactly 1 week from those disturbing doorbell camera recordings. It's Thursday, June 11th. The time is 6:40 p.m. Security footage shows Elena entering the lobby of the Planet Fitness at 560 Whiteford Way. The employees knew her well. She was a regular and knew the building thoroughly. Yet one crucial detail immediately becomes obvious. Her vehicle was absent from the parking lot. As we've established, Brannon controlled the car. Police Chief Terrence Green later confirmed Brannon had the vehicle that evening. So Elena either walked to the gym, or somebody intentionally drove her there and left her at the entrance. Then something occurred that still defies any straightforward explanation. A professional personal trainer, a woman whose daily life centered on fitness, reached the gym but never approached the workout area. Police Inspector Missy Silcox made that point especially clear. Elena did not exercise that evening. Instead, she entered the locker room, showered, and then walked out of the building. It was a strangely mechanical series of actions. Consider this. Why would anyone travel all the way to a gym simply to shower? Was she treating the building as somewhere to briefly escape someone waiting outside? Or was there some other reason she suddenly needed to clean herself? Even now, investigators have offered no definitive answer to that question. Once she left Planet Fitness, Elena moved toward the shopping area at 5412 Sunset Boulevard. That's where the large Lowe's home improvement store stands. Surveillance footage showed her walking straight toward the dense wooded area behind the store. At that precise moment, the digital trail abruptly ends. What follows is a total blind spot lasting exactly 2 hours and 37 minutes. No pedestrians passing by, no dash cam recordings, no street surveillance. Consider that vacant period for a moment. 2.5 hours in a populated section of town is an extremely long time. Where could she have been during those hours? Was she moving through the tree line, attempting to remain unseen? Was she inside someone's vehicle in a parking lot? Was she searching for somewhere secure to hide? Police have released no witness information from that vicinity, and that missing interval is the largest black hole in the entire investigation, because it could hold the answer to what truly happened. Elena finally emerges from that darkness at 9:17 p.m. She's wearing the same clothing, an olive green zip-up hoodie and black athletic pants. Cameras at the Publix supermarket at 100 Old Cherokee Road record her walking alone. And if you examine a map of Lexington, you'll immediately realize this wasn't simply the next block. The distance between the gym and that Publix is substantial. It meant crossing roads and traveling through dimly lit areas. The footage plainly shows Elena moving east. Private investigator Henry Dukes, who later joined the search, noted that this direction was logical. It went directly toward her home, but Elena never reached her front door that night. From that Publix to where she would eventually be discovered, there was still roughly a mile and a half remaining. I carefully rebuilt this timeline and removed everything irrelevant so you can see the sequence exactly as it unfolded. After Elena appeared near the Publix parking lot shortly after 9 p.m., her trail vanished permanently. That was the final camera to record her. For someone already under extraordinary emotional pressure, every movement that evening raises another question. The sequence is difficult to reconcile, especially because there is no clear explanation for what happened during those missing hours. That uncertainty becomes even more important when we examine what happened next in the investigation. From that point, the story shifts toward the efforts of law enforcement and the deeply puzzling conduct of one particular person we need to examine closely. Friday morning, June 12th, finally arrives at last. Police take the official missing person report, and once more, the detail concerning the vehicle comes sharply into focus. Honestly, for anyone following the timeline, this part is difficult to understand. Track where the objects moved. The previous night, Elena walked to the gym. Police had clearly said Brannon possessed the car. So, in practical terms, you would assume the vehicle remained at their home that evening. Yet at first glance, on Friday morning, Brannon Slice drives to the Lowe's home improvement store, the same shopping area where his wife's trail had disappeared the previous night, and discovers her car sitting there. That leaves one obvious question to anyone watching closely, and I want you to consider it as well at that point. How did a vehicle Elena never used to reach the gym wind up abandoned in a parking lot beside the woods? Who took it there and when? Even now, from the available record, publicly available case records provide no answers. From the evidence available, officers thoroughly processed the vehicle after locating it. Inside, everything appeared remarkably clean, in plain view. There were no indications that another person had entered, no signs of a struggle, and nothing pointing to the use of physical force. It appeared the vehicle had merely been parked there, waiting for its owner. Soon, an extensive search effort began. Police drones rose overhead, examining the wooded area section by section. In situations like this, investigators typically place enormous importance on the missing person's cell phone. Inspector Missy Silcox publicly said investigators believed Elena still possessed her phone. Yet its digital trail had fallen completely silent. The device was turned off and generated no network signal whatsoever. Making things even harder, cellular providers responded slowly to court orders seeking phone records, effectively leaving investigators without crucial information during the first and most important hours of the search. While search crews were wasting precious time awaiting those records during that crucial period, another development was unfolding online that changed how many people perceived the case. I examined Brannon's online activity closely during those days. It turns out that later that night, before the official missing person report and before the search effort had even started, Brannon published a Facebook post. He said his wife wasn't okay. Not long afterward, the post vanished. That creates an important question. Why publicly mention someone's condition before you have even started looking for them, then quietly remove the post afterward? From there, the story became even larger. National media organizations picked up the case. Major television networks, including ABC, NBC, Fox News, and News Nation, began reporting on Elena's disappearance. Henry Dukes' investigative agency offered a substantial cash reward for information, while dozens of local volunteers spent hours searching the dense woods beneath the intense June heat. And what was Brannon doing throughout that same period? He identifies himself as a digital content creator. During the search, he posted another message on Facebook. This time, he offered a public apology, but he wasn't apologizing for being unable to find Elena or for failing to take part sufficiently in the search. Instead, his apology concerned an old photograph he had shared a couple of weeks earlier. People immediately questioned him in the comments. Why aren't you talking about the search? Where are the requests for the community's help? Those questions received no public answer without any explanation. Meanwhile, the overall picture remained deeply contradictory from the available record. Private investigator Henry Dukes later told reporters that during their face-to-face meetings, Brandon seemed genuinely devastated and sincerely wanted to assist. As the investigation continued, local law enforcement likewise strongly rejected public speculation, stressing that Brandon was cooperating with investigators and wasn't considered a suspect. Sandra Campbell, however, described something different during an interview with journalist Brian Antin. She remembered an evening when she and Elena missed an expensive concert because Elena simply couldn't force herself to be around her husband. According to Sandra, Elena's fear was that intense. How can two entirely different portraits of the same person coexist inside one case? That's a question I still can't shake in the end. The investigation had stalled, moving attention away from the woods and toward the forensic laboratory. As we know, the first examination of Elena's body provided investigators with almost nothing. There was not one visible injury or clear clue explaining what had occurred. For the investigators at the time, the case's outcome depended completely on microscopic tissue analysis and sophisticated toxicology testing. Coroner Margaret Fisher immediately established the basic rules. She explained that no further information would be made public until the forensic pathologist officially established the cause of death. While speculation continued among the public, forensic specialists quietly pieced the puzzle together one detail at a time. By then, investigators had finally obtained the long-awaited records from the cellular providers. Crime scene experts also performed an inch-by-inch search of the area surrounding Lakeside Middle School, where Elena was eventually discovered. Yet the medical examiner's most important question wasn't where Elena had been found. It was when she had died. Investigators needed to answer one crucial question. Had her body been lying in those woods since Thursday night? Or would the biological evidence reveal a timeline inconsistent with the final surveillance footage near the Publix parking lot? While investigators said nothing publicly, two sharply different theories began dominating the public discussion. The first was presented by Elena's close friend, Sandra Campbell, during a live News Nation interview. Sandra's convinced this was a criminal case. In her view, the years of isolation, Elena's inability to access her own vehicle, and the intense fear she showed during that brunch all suggest the same conclusion. She believes someone deliberately ensured Elena would never make it home. A completely different view came from former Federal Bureau of Investigation Special Agent Jennifer Coffin-Daffer. Her assessment relies solely upon the evidence currently available. Coffin-Daffer says the surveillance footage does not show anyone following Elena as she moved toward the wooded area. She argues that declaring a crime occurred before the toxicology results are finished would be a major investigative error. From her experience, severe emotional stress and a troubled marriage can certainly occur simultaneously, but that circumstance alone does not automatically make a spouse accountable for a criminal act. So, which explanation seems more convincing to you? As of today, the case remains unresolved. Nobody has been charged with a crime. No suspects have been officially identified, and Brandon Lawson remains a free man. I've taken you through every documented stage of this unusual case, from Elena's disturbing behavior in unfamiliar neighborhoods to the unexplained holes in the surveillance timeline. But the ultimate answer won't come from internet rumors or erased social media posts. At this moment, the truth remains inside laboratory reports, toxicology findings, and forensic examination. Once the official findings become available, I'll examine each new piece of evidence in detail.
I never thought that I'd be sitting here, speaking on behalf and celebrating his death. I would always thought I'd be celebrating his life.
This was funeral footage from the Bologna family massacre in the year 2008. At that time, absolutely nobody could have imagined anything remotely like this would ever happen to them. Yet because of one fatal assumption, 3 members of the same family were killed brutally within mere seconds. What happened next became one of the most deeply controversial cases in San Francisco history. Although there was an obvious suspect, many people still continued questioning who was really responsible in a case like this. Was it simply the man who fired the weapon, or should the system also carry at least part of the blame when there were several opportunities to stop him before innocent people died? As this story unfolds, carefully remember that question, because by the end of this video, I genuinely want to hear exactly what you think. Tony Bologna was the perfect definition of a San Francisco native. Born in 1960 and raised there, San Francisco wasn't merely where he lived. It was deeply woven into the person he was. He graduated from below a high school, remained connected to his community, and created a life built around family, hard work, and simply being there for the people around him. Everyone who knew Tony seemed to describe him in exactly the same way. Dependable, the sort of man who never really needed attention or praise to do good things. On weekends, he coached youth basketball and baseball, not because it looked impressive or because somebody pressured him into it, but because he genuinely cared about neighborhood kids. During the week, he worked nights as a shift supervisor at Draeger's in San Mateo. The job was demanding, with long hours and exhausting shifts, yet somehow he still found time for his wife and children every day. Tony's wife, Danielle, also had strong, deep roots in San Francisco. They had known each other for years before marrying in 1987. By 2008, they had created a family with 4 sons in the simple, ordinary daily life that seems routine until you understand how valuable that life really is. Their eldest son, Michael Bologna, was 20 years old. He had graduated from Abraham Lincoln High School and attended College of San Mateo. Like many people his age, he was still working out what life would become, but there was already momentum, plans, ambitions, the sense that adulthood was just beginning to unfold before him. Friends described him as lively and hopeful, someone who still had his entire future ahead of him. Then came Matthew Bologna, 16 years old, still in high school, still at an age when parents are your safety net, when car rides with your father seem ordinary and easily forgotten, even though years later, those small, seemingly insignificant memories become the moments you would give anything to experience again. The youngest son involved that day was just 11 years old. Since he was a minor, his identity remained protected throughout the investigation and trial. He survived the attack, but survive becomes a complicated word when, as a child, you witness something so deeply devastating. The Bologna family weren't wealthy or privileged. They weren't famous. They had absolutely no ties to gangs, crime, or anything remotely dangerous. They were a working-class family who spent Sundays together at barbecues, worried about school and work schedules, and lived the quiet, ordinary kind of life millions of families experience every day. Nothing about them should ever have put them anywhere close to violence.
Along with top city and religious leaders all came to say goodbye to a father and his 2 sons who were gunned down on a San Francisco street. Meanwhile, police say that their investigation into this case is far from over. KTV's Rob Roth live tonight in San Francisco with more. Rob?
Well, Garcia, police say even though a suspect is in custody here at the Hall of Justice, their homicide investigation into that triple homicide has not led up. Investigators are looking at whether anyone else may have been involved.
On the opposite side of this story stood Edwin Ramos. Ramos was born in El Salvador in 1986 and spent much of his early childhood under his grandmother's care. In 2000, at just 14 years old, he entered the United States on a temporary visa to live with his mother and siblings in California. But after that visa expired, Ramos did not leave. What followed would eventually become one of the most disputed examples of systemic breakdown in San Francisco's criminal justice and immigration policies. In October 2003, Ramos, just 17 at the time, boarded a San Francisco MUN bus and brutally attacked a man, punching and kicking him. Police took him into custody and charged him with assault as well as gang-related offenses. Authorities had already determined that he was affiliated with MS-13, among the world's most violent and feared street gangs. Yet despite the severity of that assault, Ramos was given probation through juvenile court in April 2004. Just 4 days afterward, he became involved in another violent offense. This time, he attacked a pregnant woman and her brother during an attempted robbery. He was convicted and sent to Log Cabin Ranch, a juvenile detention center operated by the city. However, that sentence lasted from June 2004 through February 2005, only about 8 months. Then he was free again. For a brief period, it appeared Ramos might be attempting to change his life. Following his release, he tried applying for temporary residency status, but federal officials rejected the request after confirming that he was illegally residing in the country. Ramos then married a U.S. citizen and sought permanent residency through the marriage. He also found work in construction. On paper, it appeared to be rehabilitation. Yet investigators later said that underneath it all, Ramos had never abandoned gang life. He stayed connected to MS-13, also called Mara Salvatrucha, a gang notorious for severe violence, intimidation, and murders committed throughout Central America and the United States. In San Francisco, Ramos was connected with the gang's 20th Street clique before eventually relocating to Contra Costa County and associating with another MS-13 affiliated group called Pasadena Loco Serenos. Then another warning was overlooked. In 2006, a former MS-13 leader turned FBI informant told federal agents that Ramos had allegedly killed a 21-year-old gang member named Rolando Chino Valadares in San Francisco's Mission District. Investigators received the information, but nothing followed. No arrest, no charges, no intervention. Then came March 30, 2008, only 3 months before the Bologna killings. Police stopped Ramos during a traffic stop because his vehicle had illegally tinted windows and lacked a visible license plate. Another man, Eric Lopez, was inside the vehicle with him. During the search, officers found a firearm tied to a double homicide investigation. Authorities had documented both Ramos and Lopez as active MS-13 members. At that point, San Francisco Sheriff's deputies contacted Immigration and Customs Enforcement, commonly called ICC, to ask whether federal authorities wanted Ramos detained because of his immigration status and gang connections. ICE refused to hold him. Meanwhile, prosecutors eventually dismissed the gun-related charges against Ramos, claiming there was insufficient evidence to establish that he knew the weapon was inside the vehicle. That decision would soon face intense national scrutiny, because just 3 months later, on June 22, 2008, Tony Bologna and 3 of his sons were returning home from a family barbecue in San Francisco. What happened next would stun the city, trigger a political firestorm nationwide, and become one of the most notorious gang-related killings in San Francisco history. On June 22, 2008, violence erupted that morning in San Francisco's Mission District. At that point, it had absolutely no connection to the Bologna family. They weren't present. They didn't know anyone involved. They had no ties whatsoever to gangs or criminal activity. Yet by the end of the day, that violence would find its way to them. Nobody yet understood how closely this earlier violence would soon touch their lives directly. A man named Marvin Medina, whom investigators later said was connected to MS-13, was shot in what appeared to be a gang-related attack committed by members of the rival Norteño gang. Medina survived, but within gang culture, surviving an attack doesn't bring the conflict to an end. It frequently makes things worse. The shooting sparked a cycle of retaliation. Investigators said Edwin Ramos learned about the attack soon afterward, and almost immediately, he began seeking revenge. Prosecutors later claimed Ramos was driving through San Francisco's Excelsior district, expecting trouble, looking for anyone he thought could be associated with the Norteños. And that's what makes the next event so disturbing. The Bologna family had just left the highway and were driving home after spending the day at a family barbecue in Fairfield. Somewhere along that journey, however, Ramos spotted their vehicle and determined they were targets. Perhaps it was the road they were traveling. Perhaps it was the car's color. Perhaps it was the clothing worn by someone inside. Investigators could never establish a rational explanation. What they did establish was that Ramos believed the Bologna family belonged to a rival gang, and he never paused to challenge that belief. Ramos began shooting, sending bullets ripping through the Bologna family's vehicle within seconds. Tony Bologna died. Next to him, his 20-year-old son Michael was killed as well. Inside the vehicle, everything descended into confusion. Almost immediately, glass shattered across the car. Screams erupted inside. A routine trip home had suddenly become a nightmare they could not escape. The youngest son inside was struck by gunfire too and critically injured, yet somehow survived. Matthew Bologna, just 16 years old, was taken to San Francisco General Hospital in critical condition. Doctors struggled to save him, but his injuries were far too severe. 2 days later, on June 24th, he died from those wounds. Within moments, 3 members of one family had been lost. They weren't criminals, they weren't personally targeted, but a gang member had made a fatal error and chose to act on that belief without hesitation. San Francisco was stunned by the killings almost immediately. Even for a city accustomed to gang violence, this case felt unlike the others. A father and his sons had been mistaken for enemies and killed while simply traveling home through their own neighborhood. 3 days after the killings, on June 25, 2008, police arrested Edwin Ramos at his home in El Sobrante. He was 21 years old, and authorities booked him without bail. What came after those arrests was far more than another criminal proceeding. It grew into something much larger, a a public reckoning that compelled San Francisco to confront difficult questions about its policies, justice system, and warnings that many believed officials had overlooked. As journalists investigated Edwin Ramos's history more deeply, the case became even more troubling. Reports showed Ramos was not an unidentified suspect who had suddenly emerged from nowhere. Authorities already knew his identity. He had previous convictions. He was a documented MS-13 member. There had been earlier arrests, gang-related incidents, and even an FBI tip tying him to a previous murder investigation. Then came the March 2008 traffic stop involving another MS-13 member and a firearm, later connected to a double homicide. Despite everything, Ramos was still free. That was when scrutiny turned toward San Francisco's sanctuary city policy. At that time, San Francisco operated under laws restricting cooperation between local officials and federal immigration authorities. Trust was the central foundation of the policy from the beginning. City officials believed undocumented immigrants would feel safer reporting crimes, assisting police, and seeking help if they did not face the threat of automatic deportation. Advocates maintained that it shielded vulnerable communities while strengthening public safety overall. Yet following the Bologna murders, opponents claimed the policy had also produced dangerous gaps. In practice, Edwin Ramos, a recognized gang member with a violent criminal record, had repeatedly escaped federal immigration enforcement while residing in San Francisco. His juvenile convictions were never forwarded to immigration officials. Previous alerts concerning his gang involvement failed to result in his removal from the country. And during the March traffic stop, although sheriff's deputies contacted federal officials about him, those authorities eventually chose not to detain him. Once the public discovered those facts after the murders, anger erupted rapidly. For many, one question could no longer be dismissed. Could this tragedy have been avoided? Tony Bologna's widow, Danielle Bologna, spoke openly and bluntly about whom she held responsible. She believed the sanctuary city policy had contributed significantly to the deaths of her husband and sons. Only weeks after the August 2008 murders, she brought a civil lawsuit against San Francisco, claiming the city's treatment of Ramos and its policies had helped contribute to the tragedy. Political pressure mounted almost at once, both publicly and within city government itself, too. Then, fewer than 2 weeks after the shooting, San Francisco Mayor Gavin Newsom discreetly revised part of the city's sanctuary policy. On July 2, 2008, city officials changed the rules so undocumented juvenile felons could be referred to federal immigration authorities for potential deportation. The timing was difficult to overlook. To many observers, the revision appeared to acknowledge that something within the system had gone wrong. Officials may not have stated that openly, yet the abrupt policy change delivered a message by itself, to everyone watching. In time, the courts sided with San Francisco in Danielle Bologna's civil lawsuit. Judges found the city could not legally be held accountable because officials had received no specific warning that Ramos represented a direct danger to the Bologna family. Legally, San Francisco ultimately prevailed in court and won the case. But to Danielle Bologna, the ruling did nothing to alter the reality she was forced to endure. She had lost her husband and 2 sons within seconds. Even once the lawsuit was over, she kept speaking publicly about the case, determined that the public would never forget what had happened to her family. Danielle Bologna had laid her husband and 2 sons to rest. Her surviving son, who was wounded in that same attack, had to endure seeing his father and brothers murdered before his eyes. The family left behind was broken in ways that no court ruling, settlement, or conviction could ever completely mend. Authorities enrolled Danielle and her surviving children in a witness protection program. They were forced to leave San Francisco behind. They were assigned new identities. A family that had put down roots in that city for decades was removed from it, not willingly, but necessarily, because the man responsible for killing their family was tied to one of the most dangerous gangs in the country. And the threat did not disappear with his arrest. In the years afterward, Danielle emerged as a resolute advocate for victims of violence and for accountability in immigration enforcement. She appeared publicly in court. She gave repeated interviews. She confronted the man who had killed her family and spoke the words that needed to be spoken. She pressed publicly and persistently for Ramos to receive the death penalty. Then, District Attorney Kamala Harris declined. Harris had promised never to pursue capital punishment in any case and maintained that promise here. Danielle was enraged. She was far from being the only one. The legal proceedings moved forward at a painfully slow pace. Preliminary hearings started in June 2009. The surviving Bologna son described what he had witnessed that day. A gang specialist testified that Ramos believed the Bolognese were Norteños. Witnesses tied Ramos to the assault through text messages, testimony, and a confession made to another MS-13 member. There was another person in this case whose full involvement took years to establish. Wilfredo Flock Reyes was named by investigators as a leader inside MS-13, and a man who, testimony indicated, played a part in ordering what occurred on June 22nd. Ramos himself first attempted to shift responsibility onto Reyes, asserting that Reyes had fired the shots. Investigators rejected that version. One witness in the case, Marvin Medina, the man shot in the Mission District hours before the Bologna killings, compounded his own problems by repeatedly lying on the stand before ultimately acknowledging that he had committed perjury several times. Medina pleaded guilty to 3 counts of perjury. He was ultimately sentenced to probation. Reyes avoided law enforcement for years. He was ultimately arrested in Salisbury, North Carolina in 2012 and extradited to California. He initially pleaded not guilty, but in 2015, Reyes pleaded guilty to criminal street gang membership and firing at an occupied vehicle. He was sentenced to serve 10 years in state prison, 10 years for a man tied to the coordinated killing of 3 innocent people. Danielle Bologna watched that sentence being handed down. It is not difficult to imagine exactly what she must have felt. Regarding Edwin Ramos, in May 2012, a jury found him guilty of all 3 murders and the attempted murder of the surviving son. On June 11, 2012, he received 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, 183 years. He later appealed the verdict. In August 2014, the California Court of Appeal affirmed his convictions while ordering a minor correction to his sentence. Edwin Ramos will die behind bars. Now, one of the most powerful moments in the entire legal saga surrounding this case occurred at sentencing, when Danielle Bologna and the mother of another one of Ramos's victims stood and confronted him directly in that courtroom. Danielle had waited 4 years for this moment. 4 years filled with legal proceedings, media coverage, and repeatedly having to explain what had been taken from her. She looked directly at the man who had murdered her husband and her sons, and then she spoke. This is what happens when a system fails a family. Not only at the moment of the crime, but throughout the years that came before it. In every decision that permitted Edwin Ramos to remain in the country, to accumulate convictions, to leave juvenile facilities, and return directly to gang life, to sit beside a man carrying a murder weapon in a car 3 months before a massacre and encounter no serious consequences. Each of those moments became a door the system left open, and a father and 2 of his sons walked through one of them on their way home from a barbecue. The Bologna killings became among the most frequently cited cases in the national argument surrounding sanctuary city policies. That controversy, however, did not remain subdued for very long. In July 2008, members of the Minuteman Project, a citizen border patrol organization, staged demonstrations outside San Francisco City Hall, demanding Mayor Cuomo's resignation and urging an end to the sanctuary policy. That same summer, the New York Times published an article identifying the Ramos case as one of several major failures within San Francisco's policy. Years later, the case remained politically relevant when Kamala Harris ran for vice president in 2020 and became the Democratic presidential nominee in 2024. The controversy followed her, keeping the case visible in national political discussion for years. Her handling of the Ramos case turned into a major point of attack in national political advertising. During the 2024 presidential campaign, a super PAC backing Donald Trump aired advertisements directly criticizing Harris for declining to prosecute Ramos on gun charges following the March 2008 traffic stop and for refusing to pursue the death penalty. Her critics maintained that she had overlooked several chances to intervene before the massacre, then declined to seek the most severe punishment available afterward. Whether that political characterization seems fair depends on your views regarding prosecutorial discretion, capital punishment, and the structural boundaries of a DA's authority concerning ICE decisions. What cannot reasonably be disputed is that the Bologna family was failed by the system at several levels in numerous ways across several years, and 3 innocent people ultimately paid with their lives. There is a coda to this story, and it is among the saddest things imaginable. After losing her husband and 2 sons in one afternoon, after spending years protected under a new identity in another city, after taking the city of San Francisco to court and losing, after seeing Edwin Ramos receive life and Wilfredo Reyes receive 10 years, After enduring all of it publicly without ever surrendering, Danielle Bologna reconstructed whatever remained of a life. She had a daughter named Francesca, who was 25 years old during the summer of 2023. On August 14, 2023, Danielle Bologna, then 62, and her daughter Francesca were killed in an automobile crash in Northern California. This was a woman who had endured the worst loss a mother can endure, fought for justice for her family for 15 years, and raised her children beneath assumed identities in a city that was not home. Then she was gone instantly, killed in an accident on a road 15 years after her life had first been shattered. The family left behind by the Bologna murders, already reduced to shadows of what it had been, was diminished once more quietly, without the cameras or headlines that had accompanied every earlier chapter of this story. Tony Michael and Matthew Bologna were murdered on June 22, 2008. Danielle Bologna died on August 14, 2023. Francesca Bologna died that same day. So now I want to hear your thoughts. Was the sanctuary city policy responsible for what happened to the Bologna family? Should the DA have pursued the death penalty? And how do you view Wilfredo Reyes leaving prison after 10 years while the family he helped destroy never had the chance to walk anywhere again? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this case affected you, please hit the like button and subscribe. On March 12, 2020, outside Nashville, Tennessee, a construction worker spotted a white 2005 Acura sedan stopped beside a roadside. After peering inside, he promptly called emergency services. When first responders reached the vehicle, they found 2 occupants suffering from gunshot wounds. The victims were 33-year-old Holly Williams and her former partner, 36-year-old William Lanway. Initially, the scene appeared to mark the grim conclusion of a severely troubled relationship. Yet, when investigators examined the case more closely, they revealed an entirely different sequence of events. The breakthrough in this double homicide came from something nearly impossible to believe. The individual who commissioned the crime committed a fatal blunder by posting a favorable online review that praised the hitman for a job well done. That lone digital trace would ultimately guide investigators directly to every person involved. Holly Ann Williams was born in Nashville in January 1987. Those familiar with her frequently portrayed her as a woman whose quiet modesty coexisted with a fiercely independent nature. She possessed a keen sense of beauty and design, qualities that eventually determined her professional direction. By fall 2017, after graduating from Georgia Career Institute in Murfreesboro, Holly obtained her cosmetology license and opened her own business. Her salon focused on makeup, skincare, and eyelash extensions. The company rapidly flourished, largely because Holly herself perfectly embodied her brand, polished, ambitious, and thoroughly professional. She was never short of attention, yet eventually she permitted the unconventional William Lanway to enter her life. Their romance soon became an emotional roller coaster. Lanway demonstrated the classic traits of a manipulator. Episodes of aggression, jealousy, and efforts to dominate every part of Holly's life were deliberately concealed beneath lavish romantic gestures, costly presents, and repeated assurances that he would change. The pattern continued again and again. Holly attempted to leave the unhealthy relationship, but William consistently discovered fresh methods of coercing her into returning. The origins of his emotional instability reached far into his history, though they could never justify the decisions he made as an adult. William Lanway, whom friends knew simply as Bill, was born in Clarksville in March 1983. His psychological development was profoundly affected by severe childhood trauma, an experience that would shape his young life and affect him for years afterward. When Bill was only 3 and 1/2 years old, his father, Lyle Lanway, attacked and killed his wife, Candy Kay, William's mother. The killing occurred nearly before Bill's eyes, after his father had threatened to take both his own life and his son's. Following that, Bill was brought up by relatives, away from his father, in the horrific circumstances that had defined his earliest childhood years. At 20, he married Dana Rucker, and 3 years afterward, they welcomed their daughter, Madison Kay. In 2011, Madison died after a battle with brain cancer. The loss of his daughter utterly destroyed the marriage, and the couple ultimately divorced. Bill sank into severe depression, secured a job as a mechanic, and gradually distanced himself from nearly everyone around him, becoming increasingly isolated as he struggled with the loss. He grew adept at concealing his emotional suffering behind a reserved, timid demeanor, Yet the rage he kept suppressed would sometimes erupt in abrupt, uncontrollable outbursts. Bill met Holly at a time when he had become highly skilled at making it seem as if his life was completely under control. In bars and among friends, he seemed sociable, humorous, and pleasant to be around. That side of him vanished, however, once the relationship turned serious. Lanway started resorting to physical violence. Each time Holly gathered her belongings and attempted to leave, he exploited her deepest emotional weakness. He repeatedly mentioned the death of his daughter, hoping Holly would pity him and agree to remain with him. Everything shifted when Holly returned home from work and discovered her dog dead. The animal had been completely healthy beforehand. Though Bill vehemently denied any involvement, Holly interpreted it as an unmistakable warning, a frightening display of what he could do if she permanently left him, making her fear his intentions even more and deepening her fear. The relationship officially concluded, yet the emotional abuse moved into another stage. Lanway started deliberately stalking his ex-girlfriend. He phoned her constantly, filled her phone with messages, and lingered outside locations where he knew she would be. Another confrontation eventually intensified, prompting police intervention. Lanway was taken into custody on charges including aggravated assault and kidnapping. Holly managed to secure a protective order from the court, believing the legal system would finally protect her. Yet precisely 1 week later, the two were discovered inside that white sedan stopped beside the roadside. The passerby who called emergency services honestly thought he had encountered an ordinary traffic crash. Near a construction site in the city's southwest, a vehicle seemed to have left the roadway and stopped against a tree. He assumed the occupants required medical help following the collision. But the truth was entirely different. Officers arriving at the scene found a man and woman in the back seat. Their positions appeared abnormal, and it soon became obvious that both had been killed by gunshot wounds. Evidence inside the vehicle failed to fit what investigators would normally expect from a traffic accident. No identification papers, cell phones, or personal belongings belonging to either victim were found anywhere inside the car. After forensic specialists established the victims' identities, investigators immediately encountered their first major inconsistency. They were the same couple who had surfaced in police reports just days earlier over a domestic disturbance and kidnapping investigation. Initially, the case appeared to suggest the simplest explanation: violence arising from a failed relationship. Investigators first suspected that Lanway had shot his former partner fatally and then ended his own life. The events of the preceding several months appeared to reinforce that theory. Their conflict had reached its peak, while Holly had even strengthened her home's security by installing fresh locks and surveillance cameras. Recordings from those cameras showed William repeatedly turning up near her home, watching the property closely over time. The footage indicated that he was not planning to simply disappear. Yet soon, the murder-suicide explanation started to unravel. To begin with, witnesses reported seeing Holly and Bill together on the night of March 11th. They seemed to be having a calm conversation, and Bill displayed no clear signs of hostility or threatening conduct. Next, detectives carried out an extensive inspection of the sedan and found that one crucial item was absent: the firearm involved in the killings. With no gun recovered, the initial explanation failed to match the physical evidence. Then came the decisive setback from the ballistics findings. The bullet paths and the character of Bill's injuries demonstrated that he could not have caused those wounds himself. Whoever fired the weapon had operated with striking accuracy and control. Each round had struck a vital area, suggesting a person with considerable firearms experience. While searching both victims' residences, investigators discovered their wallets, keys, and mobile phones still there. This indicated that neither Holly nor Bill had expected to remain away for very long. More likely, they had departed without warning. By then, investigators could see the basic structure of the crime far more clearly. They determined that Holly and William had been taken against their will and murdered at another site. Their bodies were subsequently loaded into the Acura, transported to an isolated location, and the car was arranged to look like a roadway accident, apparently to slow the investigation and mislead law enforcement. The staging itself was fairly rough, probably because the person or people responsible were operating under considerable time constraints. Nevertheless, the vehicle's interior was surprisingly spotless. Forensic examiners recovered no fingerprints and no biological material connected to a third party. Investigators then turned their attention to the possibility of a hired killing or deliberate revenge. Considering Bill's volatile temper and his past a pattern of resolving disputes through violence, detectives thought he might have accumulated dangerous enemies. However, that explanation became considerably more difficult when investigators considered Holly. She had no links to criminal activity and appeared to lead a peaceful, settled life. In that situation, the most plausible explanation was that she had simply been with Bill at the wrong moment and had become an accidental witness. Examination of the victim's electronic devices finally generated the first meaningful breakthrough. Investigators discovered an identical unknown contact within the messaging applications on both phones. The phone number had been generated through anonymous online services frequently used to conceal and obscure someone's digital identity from detection. To bypass those safeguards and determine the real user, local investigators sought technical support from the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Cyber Division. At the same time, detectives examined archived recordings from Holly's home surveillance system, and what they uncovered was disturbing. A few days before the killing, 3 men entered her residence. Their behavior clearly indicated deliberate preparation. They dressed in dark clothes, covered their faces, and moved with clear intent. Despite the many valuables inside, they deliberately left every single one untouched. Their apparent focus was solely on the home's layout. When one intruder spotted a security camera, he simply shut it off. The men behaved with confidence, seeming barely worried about detection. When Holly arrived home that evening, she immediately clearly knew that someone had entered her home. Frightened, she blocked the doors and stayed inside for the night. Then, the next morning, she quickly replaced every lock. She understood that someone had come searching for her and took every possible measure she could to keep herself safe from harm. But who was actually pursuing her? That created an immediate question. Was volatile Bill Lanway the true target, or had the prosperous salon owner been the intended victim all along? To resolve that question, detectives started examining Holly's business and the people associated with it far more closely. That investigation was when the name Layla Love appeared in the investigation for the first time. Detectives quickly learned that Holly's beauty salon represented only the lawful portion of her income. From age 18 onward, she had worked professionally as a high-end escort. Investigators said the salon also provided a means of legitimizing considerable income while preserving a respectable image among friends and relatives. In that concealed world, Holly operated under the alias Layla Love. She charged premium rates that discouraged casual customers and dealt exclusively with affluent clients. Her services included accompanying customers to private functions and arranging intimate encounters. The profession enabled her to accumulate considerable wealth within a fairly short time. However, that financial success brought clear dangers as well. Such work inevitably drew unstable and potentially dangerous people. Holly never completely concealed what she did for a living. Those closest to her, Bill included, knew precisely how she earned her money. At the beginning of their relationship, she had been entirely truthful with him about it. She did not plan to abandon such a lucrative career, convinced she had matters under control and could personally handle the risks involved. Naturally, investigators considered whether the masked men who entered her residence were directly tied to her private occupation. Authorities also released recordings from Holly's home security cameras, hoping members of the public could identify the intruders. Sadly, the footage was too unclear to distinguish any of their faces. The case finally shifted dramatically when Federal Bureau of Investigation technical specialists succeeded in identifying the owner of the protected phone number discovered on both victims' devices. The subscriber was 30-year-old Adam Carey of North Carolina. His history bore little resemblance to that of an ordinary, conventional street criminal. Carey was an ex-military serviceman who had served in special operations units, and during the course of the investigation, he was employed by a private security firm. Investigators had essentially uncovered a highly trained professional contract operative. A biometric examination returned an exact 100% match. Carey's facial characteristics corresponded with one of the men recorded by Holly's security cameras during the nighttime intrusion. As detectives investigated his history, they discovered still more deeply troubling information. Carey had once faced charges for impersonating a police officer. When authorities searched his residence in that earlier case, they found an arsenal that seemed more suited to a tactical unit than an average civilian. It contained firearms, suppressors, tactical optics, components capable of being used to build explosive devices, and flashbang grenades. Strikingly, Despite the quantity of specialized gear recovered, Carey received just a 4-month jail sentence. For investigators, such a lenient punishment naturally prompted serious questions about whether he possessed powerful connections. Backed by extensive specialized tactical training, Carey had earned a reputation for accepting sensitive assignments and offering protection to high-profile clients. A tactical team quickly took him into custody and arrested him. During interrogation, Carey declined to cooperate. He relied on counter-interrogation methods learned during his training. While Carey stayed behind bars, detectives turned their focus toward the next contact listed in the victim's phone records. That individual was Eric Charles Mond, an influential Texas businessman who owned a chain of automobile dealerships in Austin. Across Texas, he was regarded as a successful executive, devoted husband and father, and respected community member. Yet that carefully preserved public image collapsed because of one crucial detail. Mond had been a frequent client of Layla Love. He regularly traveled to Nashville, officially saying he was visiting his son, who attended college there. In truth, those journeys were planned so he could see Holly. On February 3, 2020, Mond contacted her through a concealed email account and an alias to set up another meeting. Their brief exchange was casual. He merely said he had arrived in town and proposed meeting at a nearby bar. The meeting happened, but what came afterward would mark a major turning point in his life. On March 1st, Mond started receiving messages on his personal phone demanding $25,000. The unknown sender threatened to reveal his extramarital affair to his wife. If exposed, it could devastate his family, destroy his reputation, and possibly cost him millions of dollars in divorce proceedings. The businessman suddenly found himself cornered, with no clue who was behind the extortion. Rather than immediately alerting law enforcement, Mond decided on a completely different course. Mond contacted his 47-year-old associate, Gilad Peld. Previously, Peld had worked for Mond's dealership, removing homeless encampments from its properties. By coincidence, Peld also owned the same private security firm where the captured operative, Adam Carey, was officially employed. After moving back to Texas from Israel, Peld had started the company, but by then the business was facing financial difficulties. In a state where most law-abiding residents may legally possess firearms and protect themselves, the need for private security was comparatively low. A request from someone as wealthy and powerful as Eric Mond therefore represented a significant opportunity for the company. The agreement was made with little delay, and Peld accepted the opportunity. The arrangement also gave the struggling company a chance to secure valuable work at a time when ordinary demand was weak locally. For investigators, that connection would later prove especially important because it tied the businessman's request directly to Peld's company and its operative. Then, only several weeks afterward, once Holly Williams and Bill Lanway had been discovered inside the abandoned vehicle, Mond did something that was almost unbelievable. On a professional review site, he published a glowing public review of Peld's security firm. In his remarks, he offered the company's workers the highest praise for their professionalism and said he was entirely satisfied with the results. That remarkable online trace brought the case together. Investigators now possessed a direct link between the businessman facing extortion, the private security company owner, and the contract operative who completed the job. Only one element remained. They needed Adam Carey to speak. Detectives ensured Carey understood exactly what remaining silent might mean for his future. After considering his choices, the ex-operative agreed to cooperate. His account revealed precisely how the entire scheme had unfolded. Carey said the plan originated with Eric Mond. After coming under pressure from an unidentified extortionist, Mond first assumed Holly was behind it and contacted Gilad Peld to resolve matters without bringing in police. Peld subsequently recruited Carey, together with 46-year-old Brian Brockway, another former Marine with considerable combat experience. Initially, their task was simple: find the anonymous sender and intimidate that person into making the problem disappear. Carey recorded each phase of the surveillance, forwarding Peld detailed reports that sounded more like military situation reports than updates from a private investigation. As monitoring continued and digital evidence accumulated, the truth soon became clear. Holly had absolutely no involvement in the extortion. In fact, she was unaware that any of it was taking place. Bill Lanway was the person responsible for the scheme. After learning that his former girlfriend had maintained a secret relationship with the Texas millionaire, Bill chose to exploit that knowledge by sending threatening messages from an anonymous phone number. The situation spiraled on March 11th when Bill phoned Mond at his home. The thought of Mond's wife answering the call sent the businessman into a panic. If the affair were exposed, it would almost certainly end his marriage and subject him to massive financial and reputational damage. Peld answered with a calculated, ruthless proposal. He recommended killing both the individual behind the extortion and Holly, whom he considered the original source of the trouble and a possible witness. Investigators determined that Mond immediately agreed, valuing protection of his reputation at $750,000. From there, the operation moved forward. On March 12th, Holly and Bill departed home with only the necessities, clearly expecting a brief absence, and entered their car. Their journey ended nearly at once. Investigators said Carey and Brockway, both carrying weapons, intercepted the vehicle. Holly and Bill were subdued, taken into custody, and transported to a construction site near Old Hickory Boulevard. From there, the assignment proceeded with calculated precision. Following the fatal shooting, their bodies were returned to the Acura. The vehicle was then shoved down an embankment, so it would appear to have been involved in a traffic collision. During the next several hours, the two men methodically removed evidence, discarded anything that might link them to the location, and returned the rental vehicle used throughout the operation. Convinced they had erased every trace, the group split up and very nearly escaped without consequences, and that nothing remained to expose their involvement. The whole scheme might have stayed hidden had one astonishing error not exposed it. Eric Mond chose to publish a glowing online review thanking the very individuals who had executed the operation for him. After investigators gathered sufficient evidence, they decided the time had come to apprehend the man they believed had masterminded the scheme. Detectives developed an undercover plan and set up a monitored telephone call. During the operation, Peld called Mond and said an unexpected complication had emerged. According to the scenario, one participant had started raising difficult questions, requesting more money to remain silent and threatening to contact law enforcement. Peld casually proposed resolving this latest problem just as the earlier two had been dealt with. Mond voiced frustration, but investigators said he showed no hesitation when approving the proposal. For him, keeping the secret was still the sole priority, despite everything they had done to conceal the operation from investigators. On December 10, 2021, the owner of the dealership Empire was arrested. Shortly afterward, all four suspects faced formal charges or anyone who might discover it directly. During interrogation, Mond predictably attempted to place the blame on everyone else. He insisted that he had merely wanted someone to threaten the extortionist and discover the truth. In his account, the hired operatives had exceeded his instructions and entirely misread what he meant. Yet documentary records, along with phone logs and other digital evidence, provided little support for that explanation. Eventually, Mond admitted his involvement in the criminal conspiracy. The men responsible for carrying out the operation displayed no remorse. Recordings from listening devices installed earlier captured exchanges where Brockway and Peld joked together, remarking that the two victims had gotten off far too easily. Ultimately, the case reached its conclusion in court. The trial opened in November 2023 and continued for 2 weeks. Prosecutors laid out a precise, methodical timeline backed by overwhelming financial evidence. The financial trail made the sequence remarkably clear. On March 5th, Mond sent Peld an initial payment of $15,000. On March 9th, surveillance on Holly and Bill became more intense. Then, on March 12th, the date the crime occurred, Mond approved another $150,000 transfer, which prosecutors called the final signal to proceed. By the investigation's conclusion, financial records revealed that $750,000 in total had moved from the dealership owner's accounts. Evidence showed that Pyle had divided those funds among the team members involved in the operation. The jury deliberated for only 7 hours before reaching a verdict. On November 17th, Brockway and Carey were convicted of contract murder and kidnapping resulting in death. Pyle received the identical verdict after agreeing to assist prosecutors before trial and testifying against the others. Then, on November 30th, the jury returned its verdict against Eric Mond. He was convicted of arranging the contract killing. All 4 men received life sentences without the possibility of parole. Mond's defense attorneys announced plans to challenge the conviction on appeal. Prosecutors and investigators, however, said they were completely satisfied with the result, stressing that neither Holly nor Bill deserved what happened to them. Bill Lanway's effort to earn quick money through an amateur extortion plot ultimately set off a chain of events that ended catastrophically. Prosecutors said his conduct sparked a brutal response from a powerful businessman who decided to employ a professional team to eliminate the problem. Ultimately, Holly Williams became collateral damage of that scheme, a woman whose life was ended simply to guarantee that nobody would ever reveal the truth.
Harvey, every day we ask ourselves why it had to be you. Every day we live with the pain of what happened to you. But we promise that every day we will say your name.
This is the grandmother of little Harvey Mucklebust, mourning the devastating loss of her beloved grandson. The Mucklebust family had placed their precious baby in the care of Rocking Horse Ranch childcare. Yet on September 22, 2025, when they brought Harvey to daycare, they never imagined it would be the final time they would see their baby alive. As investigators started reconstructing the events of that day, they discovered something profoundly disturbing involving one employee, 18-year-old Thea Russell. After hours of questioning, she eventually revealed something truly bizarre. She claimed she had done it just for attention alone.
We had probable cause to believe Thea Russell intentionally suffocated these children on 3 occasions to seek attention.
Minnesota has seen few cases as heartbreaking as this one. Harvey was only a small child who deserved to be safe, cherished, and protected. Instead, he was hurt by someone entrusted with looking after him. For Catherine and Hunter, their lives had finally felt whole. They had their beautiful little boy, Declan, while another baby was on the way, promising still more love, laughter, and chaos for their home. They were stepping into one of the very happiest periods of their lives, excitedly anticipating the arrival of their second son. Then, on September 27, 2024, Catherine and Hunter welcomed Harvey Gene Mucklebust into the world. His family remembered him as pure joy and sunshine from the instant he arrived. For them, Harvey was the child who made their already affectionate family feel even more complete. What he loved most was being with his family, including taking family walks with his 2 first siblings. He had an older brother named Declan, who loved him enormously. Although Declan was still little himself, he had already embraced being a protective big brother. He would bring his younger brother toys, make him giggle by pulling funny faces, and sit next to him as he played. At times, the two would simply crawl around together, entirely absorbed in their own small world. Harvey had also learned how to play catch, wrestle with his big brother, throw balls from his ball pit, and climb over anything and everything nearby. For an 11-month-old infant, Declan's face was recognizable, reassuring, and a place of safety. To Declan, meanwhile, his younger brother was someone he cherished. They were both so little, yet their connection was incredibly remarkably strong. Harvey was crawling and beginning to say Mama and Dada. His family lovingly nicknamed him their little Harv monster. Like countless working families, Catherine and Hunter required childcare. They selected Rocking Horse Ranch Childcare in Savage, Minnesota, a licensed daycare facility that had been operating for decades. On paper, it appeared to be precisely the sort of place parents were urged to trust. Rocking Horse Ranch described itself as a licensed, accredited neighborhood childcare provider. It said its workers met or surpassed state qualification standards and highlighted an experienced staff, claiming every member had over 10 years of experience. The center had also completed a licensing review in December 2024 without violations that would have caused immediate alarm. For Catherine and Hunter, this was precisely what they had hoped to find. They weren't worried about the expense. When their precious little baby was involved, they wanted the highest quality care available. Nothing gave them a reason to think they had chosen incorrectly. Yet on the morning of September 22, 2025, the confidence they had placed in Rocking Horse Ranch was about to collapse. On Monday, September 22, 2025, Harvey Mucklebust was only 5 days from celebrating his first birthday. At 11 months old, he was learning fresh words, crawling, pulling himself upright, and growing increasingly curious about everything around him. That morning, just as on so many mornings before, Harvey was taken to Rocking Horse Ranch Childcare in Savage, Minnesota. It was a routine daycare morning drop-off. There is no public record indicating that Harvey appeared visibly ill that morning, or that his parents cautioned the daycare about any medical concerns. They believed they were entrusting their son to a licensed child care center they could rely on. However, At approximately 10:10 a.m., Scott County Dispatch received a high-priority medical call from Rocking Horse Ranch.
Shannon 1013 in service 1007. Savage Duty Crew, this is your page for a high priority medical at Rocking Horse Ranch, 14859 Louisiana Avenue South, for a 10-month-old baby that's not conscious and not breathing. Time of page is 1011.
Officer Patrick Miller with the Savage Police Department arrived mere seconds after the dispatch call came in. He was sent to the playroom, where a daycare employee was holding Harvey. The boy looked pale, his lips were turning blue, and responders were having difficulty locating a pulse. They immediately started resuscitation efforts and transported Harvey to a nearby hospital at the scene. Catherine rushed to the daycare after being told her son was not breathing. Hunter, who was working across the country, received the devastating news there. Despite every attempt to save him, Harvey could not be revived. At 11:34 a.m., Harvey Gene Mucklebust was pronounced dead. He was only 5 days from his first birthday. His family had lost the little boy they called pure happiness and sunshine from the instant he arrived. During the hours that followed, investigators began working to determine how an apparently healthy 11-month-old had suddenly stopped breathing. There were no visible injuries that explained his death, while preliminary testing and toxicology failed to immediately reveal an obvious cause without any clear explanation. Initially, at that point in the investigation, investigators had to consider whether Harvey experienced a sudden, unexplained medical event. Then they uncovered something that altered the investigation. Harvey was not the first infant to experience a medical emergency at Rocking Horse Ranch. Only 3 days earlier, on Friday, September 19th, a 4-month-old infant identified in official records as AV1 had briefly stopped breathing inside the daycare. Later, investigative reporting stated that she was found with around her nose and mouth. When officers arrived, she was breathing again. Her parents brought her to the hospital, where doctors evaluated her before releasing her. At that point, the incident was treated as a medical emergency, with no public indication that anyone had intentionally harmed her. However, the baby returned to Rocking Horse Ranch the following Monday. She appeared healthy upon arrival that morning. A short while later, she was discovered unresponsive again, once more with around her nose and mouth. Her parents were notified and once again brought her to the hospital. Police were not immediately sent to the daycare following the second incident, and there remained no public finding that either episode was intentional, but investigators would eventually discover a link between the two incidents. The same daycare employee had been the last person to contact AV before she became unresponsive. Her name was Thea Russell. Hours after the baby's second emergency, Harvey was found unresponsive. Russell had also been with him shortly before he stopped breathing. Investigators now had 2 infants, 3 medical emergencies, 1 daycare, and the same employee appearing across the timelines. Detectives started reconstructing events involving both children while interviewing daycare employees. The other baby had experienced 2 unexplained episodes. Harvey had suddenly stopped breathing and died, and both children had been under Russell's care shortly before their medical emergencies. The investigation was now confronting a much more disturbing question. Had someone intentionally harmed these babies? Authorities would eventually allege that Harvey's death was not a tragic medical mystery, but a deliberate act. Thea Russell was at the center of that investigation. Yet before detectives could establish what had occurred, they needed to reconstruct Harvey's final hours inside Rocking Horse Ranch. Somewhere between his arrival that morning and the moment he was discovered without a pulse, something had happened to an 11-month-old baby, and investigators needed to determine exactly what. When Harvey Mucklebust died on September 22, 2025, investigators knew they were facing something they could not explain. But the case changed entirely the next day. The medical examiner determined that Harvey's death was a homicide by suffocation.
Based on the totality of the evidence in this 3 months investigation, we had probable cause to believe Thea Russell intentionally suffocated these children on 3 occasions to seek attention, and that third incident tragically resulted in the death of Harvey Mucklebust.
He had not merely stopped breathing. Someone had brought about his death. Suddenly, everything that had taken place at Rocking Horse Ranch during the previous 3 days had to be viewed through a different lens. Another infant had experienced a breathing crisis, and 1 employee appeared within the timeline involving both children, Thea Russell. Russell had worked at Rocking Horse Ranch for only about 3 weeks when Harvey died. Investigators said she had been the final employee to interact with the 4-month-old infant AE before both of her medical emergencies. Then, on the morning Harvey died, Russell had been with him too.
A clear pattern emerged. Thea Russell was a common denominator in each of these incidents. She had last contact with each of the affected children immediately prior to these events. Notably, she had only been employed with the daycare for 3 weeks at that time. Her behavior and actions at the scene immediately raised suspicion, drawing investigative focus to her as the primary person of interest.
With a homicide investigation underway, detectives started piecing together the daycare's timeline, reviewing staff accounts, and scrutinizing everything that occurred before Harvey was discovered unresponsive. Russell offered investigators an explanation for Harvey's condition. Court documents state that she said Harvey had been constipated and claimed his parents had given him melatonin to help him sleep.
So initially, Russell told police that Harvey was constipated and that Harvey's parents gave the boy a sleep aid called melatonin on the day that he was found unresponsive. This is according to KTSP in Minneapolis. And then I'll tell you what police say really happened. It's sick to think that this woman tried to pin anything on the parents or melatonin or something that the parents might have given Harvey on the day that he allegedly died.
Yet another element of her story prompted serious concern. Russell reportedly told detectives she had heard Harvey crying inside his crib shortly before he was discovered unresponsive. She said she instructed another employee to check on him, but that worker was reportedly seated nearer the infant sleeping area and insisted she hadn't heard Harvey cry. It was just one inconsistency, yet detectives were examining every detail under the lens of a homicide, and their attention returned again and again to Russell. During the months that followed, investigators questioned daycare staff, former employers, relatives, and people connected to Russell's past. Police said they found what they characterized as a pattern of attention-seeking conduct, including irrational 911 calls, fire-related incidents, and troubling behavior involving other children.
This revealed a documented history of attention-seeking behavior, including her making multiple 911 calls reporting nonsensical incidents and simply hanging up. Also learned were past incidents involving starting fires at a church camp and erratic behavior toward other children.
The allegations did not establish that Russell had killed Harvey, but investigators felt they were starting to see a possible pattern, and over time, they came to believe they had identified a possible motive. Police said Russell had deliberately injured the infants in an effort to attract attention. Still, detectives needed her account of what had taken place inside the daycare. On January 13, 2026, Russell was arrested and brought to the Savage Police Department for questioning. For months, investigators had traced the case backward from Harvey's death. Now, they had the individual they believed might explain what had occurred. Initially, detectives returned to one central question: what happened to Harvey? The criminal complaint states that Russell eventually provided an answer. She allegedly told investigators Harvey had been crying in his crib. Then, according to the complaint, she said, "I him and he stopped breathing."
During the questioning, Thea confessed to intentionally two children in an attention-seeking act. She provided detailed descriptions of how she carried out the attempts against the life of the first victim on 2 separate occasions, and she confessed to the murder of Harvey Mucklebust.
The infant survived both assaults. Harvey did not. Police said Russell later told investigators she had hurt the children because she wanted attention. That claimed motive made an already disturbing case even harder to comprehend. These young children were not strangers who had unexpectedly encountered someone dangerous. They were infants entirely reliant on the adults entrusted with them. Russell was one of those adults. She had been employed to look after them. On January 15th, prosecutors officially and formally charged Russell with second-degree murder in Harvey's death, as well as assault charges involving AV. Yet the case was far from over. As prosecutors moved forward with their investigation, the allegations grew even more serious and severe. In April 2026, a Scott County grand jury indicted Russell on 4 counts: premeditated first-degree murder while committing child abuse with a past pattern of child abuse, and 2 counts of first-degree assault causing great bodily harm involving AV. Russell has pleaded not guilty and remains presumed innocent unless proven guilty in court. For Harvey's parents, though, no legal proceeding could reverse what had already taken place. Their son should have been getting ready to celebrate his first birthday. Instead, they were getting ready to bury him. And they were left facing a question that reached beyond Russell herself. How could something like this happen inside a licensed daycare? And why was there no camera footage showing exactly what had occurred inside those rooms? No video existed to show Harvey's parents what happened to their son. No recording ever captured his final moments. Just the evidence investigators managed to reconstruct afterward. That became one reason Catherine and Hunter decided they could not simply leave the entire case behind. They wanted something to change, something that could safeguard the next child. The Mucklebust family began pushing for legislation requiring permanent surveillance cameras in licensed childcare centers. The legislation became known as Harvey's Law. They wanted his name to represent more than the terrible thing that happened to him. They wanted it to stand for accountability. Above all, they wanted Harvey to help ensure that another family would never have to ask the question they were forced to ask. What happened to my child when I wasn't there to protect him? With Thea Russell's arrest, Harvey McClab's family finally received an answer to the question that had haunted them for months. Yet an arrest could never return Harvey home, nor could an indictment alter what occurred on September 22nd, 2025. His first birthday should have come just 5 days later, with Harvey celebrating alongside his family. Instead, they were facing the reality of living without him. For the Mucklebust family, Harvey was far more than the little boy at the heart of a criminal investigation. He was the baby who brought laughter into their home, the little boy who adored playing beside his older brother Declan, the child they nicknamed their Harv Monster. Even now, his family encounters reminders of him in places most people would barely notice. For Harvey's grandmother, those memories have become part of her daily life.
From the moment Harvey was born, he filled our world with sunshine. His passion for playing, infectious laugh, loving heart put a smile on everybody's face. Just 5 days shy of his first birthday, he was on the move, crawling, climbing up the stairs and sliding back down, and learning to say mama and dada. He loved the time playing with his big brother, who misses him deeply. He was affectionately known as our little Harv Monster. Harvey was such a blessing to our family, and his death has left a tremendous hole in our hearts. Harvey's fingerprints are on my sliding glass door, and his drool stains still show on his crib sheets. Those are the little things that I'm not ready to wash away. We miss him more than anything in this world, but we try to remember with each ray of sunshine, each gentle breeze, and each star in the sky that he's always with us, shining down. Harvey, every day we ask ourselves why it had to be you. Every day we live with the pain of what happened to you. But we promise that every day we will say your name. Every day we will continue to fight for you. And in the end, we will make sure that justice has been served. Harvey, we love and miss you. Thank you.
Those are the small things that refuse to fade away. We miss you more than anything in this world. Yet we try to remember through every ray of sunshine, every soft breeze, and every star above that he's still beside us, shining down. Harvey, each day we ask ourselves why it had to be you. Each day we carry the pain of what happened to you. Still, we promise that every day we will speak your name. Every day we will keep fighting for you. And eventually we will make certain that justice has been served. Harvey, we love you and miss you. Thank you. Those are the pieces that remain after someone is gone. Not the headlines or court records, but the small fragments of an ordinary life that unexpectedly became precious. And for Catherine and Hunter, keeping Harvey's memory alive was only one part of what followed. They wanted something to change. There had been no camera inside the infant room to capture what happened to their son. According to Harvey's family, that absence left them facing questions that perhaps never should have existed. So they carried their fight to the Minnesota State Capitol. In March 2026, Catherine and Hunter stood beside State Representative Nolan West to introduce legislation that became known as Harvey's Law. The proposal would mandate video cameras in infant and toddler rooms at certain licensed Minnesota child care centers receiving state funding, with footage kept for 28 days. The purpose was straightforward: preserve a record of what takes place when parents aren't there.
Our son, Harvey Gene Mucklebust, was 5 days short of his first birthday when he was at daycare. Only a couple of hours later, I received a phone call no one should ever have to answer. Our perfectly healthy, beautiful son, Harvey, was not breathing. I raced to the daycare and called Hunter frantically to get home as he was working on the other side of the country. Our beautiful baby boy, the happiest, smiliest, laughing little light in every room, was Harvey's death was completely avoidable if cameras were installed. The truth would have been revealed after the first attempted murder, and that employee could have been terminated and not allowed to ever work with children again. We lost our sunshine, our Harv monster, the baby who loved to giggle, who lit up when his brother walked in the room, who should be learning to run and talk and explore the world right now.
For the Mucklebust family, cameras aren't for monitoring every moment of a child's life. They are meant to provide evidence when something goes wrong. A recording might reveal what truly occurred. It could help investigators determine how an injury happened, and it might also shield an innocent caregiver from a wrongful accusation. During Harvey's Law's announcement, Representative Nolan West emphasized that point. But to Harvey's parents, this wasn't an abstract policy argument. They understood exactly what it meant to have no footage of their child's final moments. They wanted the next parent to have something they had been denied, a way to know what happened and learn the truth. And perhaps, most importantly, a way to step in before it was too late.
We think every day about how different things could have been if only cameras had been installed. Other children would not have been harmed, and we would be holding our son. We would not have to daydream about the memories we never got to create. Our 3-year-old wouldn't sit up at night crying for his brother. And asking when he will come home. And we wouldn't have to wear Harvey's ashes in our jewelry to carry him with us. We should have a happy, healthy 18-month-old. This legislation is about accountability. It's about transparency. It's about protecting children. No parent should ever have to wonder what happened behind closed doors. And no family should live with the unanswered questions that we carry.
The legislation was named for Harvey, yet its origins reached far beyond his death. It grew out of one family's determination to ensure that no other family would ever endure this kind of loss. As the family worked to seek change, the criminal case against Russell continued advancing through the courts. Russell was first charged with second-degree murder and assault charges after her arrest. In April 2026, a Scott County grand jury indicted her on 2 counts of first-degree murder in Harvey's death and 2 counts of first-degree assault involving the surviving infant. Still, an indictment does not constitute a conviction. Russell remains presumed innocent unless and until she is found guilty in court. Harvey Gene Mucklebust was far more than the tragedy that brought his life to an end, and his family will continue proudly carrying his name forward with them. In loving memory of Harvey from September 27, 2024 to September 22, 2025. Starting with nothing, a woman creates a whole life. At 18, she marries. She raises 2 daughters. She endures 2 failed marriages. From the ground up, she creates a real estate empire. She brings a National Leadership Award right home to her county. For decades, she devotes herself to mission work because her father taught her that faith is service. Then, at 50, she encounters a man who seems to embody everything she had been seeking. A man decorated with medals, a man wearing a badge, a man bearing a fire department patch and an Air Force uniform. A man Vanessa Mintz would proudly call her cowboy. 2 years later, that very man would face investigators and voluntarily surrender the shotgun that killed her. This is Vanessa Mintz's story, a woman who devoted her entire life to raising others up. And the husband who, prosecutors allege, shot her twice inside her family's own mountain lodge, staged a robbery as a cover, and then, fewer than 12 hours after her body was discovered, emailed his military commander asking about her life insurance policy. Stay with us, because the most disturbing part of this story isn't the gunshot. It's everything that happened before it, and everything Travis McGraw did afterward. Vanessa Yvonne Mintz entered the world on June 22, 1957. She was the sole child of Dr. Carl Mintz and Sylvia Korn Mintz. Her father served as a Baptist preacher for almost 40 years, while her family's roots in the mountains of western North Carolina reached back 9 generations. Saluda wasn't simply somewhere the family passed through. Saluda was part of who they were. For nearly 2 centuries, they had been woven through its churches, its leadership, and its community life. As a child, Vanessa's parents brought her along on Christian mission trips across the globe. Her father later recalled that she grew profoundly devoted to that work. It wasn't merely a phase for her, but a foundation. In the Mintz home, faith, sacrifice, and service to others were more than expressions. They became the blueprint guiding Vanessa throughout her life. At 18, Vanessa entered her first marriage. She became the mother of 2 daughters, Jessica Freeman and Andrea Little Gray. Even while she was a young wife and mother, she continued moving steadily forward. Eventually, her first marriage ended in divorce when she and her husband drifted apart. Then came a second, short-lived marriage, which ended as well. By 2008, Vanessa had recently turned 50. She had endured 2 divorces. Yet anyone who knew her would say she was never someone who would remain idle and pity herself. In her professional life, Vanessa had become a powerhouse. She established herself in real estate, eventually becoming an owner and broker with Remax 4 Seasons. She wasn't merely contributing to somebody else's success. She had created her own name, reputation, and client base in the industry. Still, Vanessa's goals extended well beyond her profession. In 2008, she brought the Ataina Leadership Award to Henderson County. It was a national honor recognizing women who reach professional excellence while helping other women rise into leadership positions. The Ataina philosophy centers on values such as living authentically, forming relationships, showing courage, and giving back. Friends who knew Vanessa said those principles could have been written specifically for her. She also mentored younger women, among them local pageant winner Heather Waldbart, who later became a professional dancer. Waldbart recalled Vanessa as someone who truly wanted people to pursue their dreams and trusted they could achieve them. Her friend Marcia Blight Cunningham described Vanessa simply, a mover and shaker, perpetually busy, continually creating something: real estate, leadership awards, mission trips, mentoring. Since her family owned the Saluda Mountain Lodge, Vanessa also served there as general manager, helping operate the family business that had belonged to their lives for generations. Her daughters remembered her as enormously kind-hearted, trusting nearly to a fault, deeply forgiving, and convinced that with enough determination she could solve anything, even when she had absolutely no experience in the field. But by early 2008, after 2 failed marriages, Vanessa's personal world had grown lonely. Her career was flourishing. Personally, she was beginning all over again. Then Travis McGraw entered her office. When Travis Lee McGraw met Vanessa, he was 44, 9 years younger than she was, separated from his wife, and at least on paper, seemingly ideal. He seemed polished, accomplished, and available, exactly the kind of man who might have appeared to offer Vanessa a fresh beginning after all she'd endured. He had served in the Air Force Reserve, where he earned 2 Air Force Achievement Medals, along with an Air Force Commendation Medal. He had also worked as a firefighter, EMT, and police officer in Fletcher, North Carolina. For Vanessa, who had grown up believing that serving others was the highest calling, Travis's resume probably sounded like poetry. Their paths crossed through real estate. Travis was searching for a house, and Vanessa represented him as his agent. Her daughters said the romance developed quickly. Travis texted her constantly. He would appear at her office carrying treats. Whenever Vanessa worked at the family lodge, Travis brought her dinner. Vanessa told friends she had finally found her cowboy. Once Travis's divorce was finalized, he and Vanessa eloped in 2009. From the outside, their lives appeared golden. Vanessa's daughters looked back warmly on those first days. Jessica Freeman later recalled, Travis became Vanessa's running partner, someone who matched her relentless energy and her love of doing things together. Travis's father, Willie McGraw, also believed the two families fit together well. Vanessa embraced Travis's children from his earlier marriage, including his teenage son, Taylor. Travis likewise appeared interested in Vanessa's daughters and grandchildren. After they married, Travis joined Vanessa in real estate, working with a Hendersonville area firm. For 2 years, their marriage seemed like a second-chance love story. A woman who had endured 2 divorces had finally found stability. A man with a history of service was finally creating a secure family life. Yet by early 2011, something had changed, and the problem wasn't visible on the surface. While working in real estate, Travis met Mary Beth Fisher, a 27-year-old woman. She had recently separated from her husband, had a young son, and needed a new place to live. Travis, the same man who had helped Vanessa find a home years before, began showing Fisher properties. According to Fisher's later testimony, Travis told her he had no one. He never told her about Vanessa. He never disclosed that he was married. Most of their relationship unfolded through text messages and phone calls. Fisher said it was not physically sexual, but they exchanged messages that said, "I love you." Eventually, someone at Fisher's workplace revealed that Travis was actually married. When she confronted him, Travis allegedly offered another explanation, claiming he and Vanessa had faked their marriage or that they were separated and living apart, essentially functioning only as business partners. One thing especially struck Fisher. Travis never introduced her to his children. She thought that was odd. In hindsight, it became clear he was deliberately keeping the different parts of his life apart. By January 2011, Fisher and Travis had been heavily involved for quite some time, at least emotionally, according to her account. Meanwhile, at home, Vanessa's daughters said their mother was beginning to realize that something was wrong. Jessica Freeman said Vanessa grew withdrawn. She couldn't eat. She struggled to drink properly. Stress had made her physically ill. Her daughters said Vanessa wanted to preserve her marriage and still believed in it, even as its foundation collapsed beneath her. They also said Vanessa had told them she intended to confront Mary Beth Fisher herself and ask her to leave Travis alone. Fisher has denied that such a meeting ever happened. The public record does not establish either version. What is clear is that the emotional strain within this triangle was moving toward a breaking point. Then, on February 17, 2011, it finally arrived. That evening, Mary Beth Fisher noticed a text from Vanessa on Travis's phone containing the word love. Fisher was furious. She confronted Travis and issued an ultimatum. Choose. Decide who he wanted exclusively. She gave him until Sunday to respond. Vanessa Mintz had less than 48 hours left to live. February 18, 2011, the day following the ultimatum. Although plenty was unfolding out of sight, Vanessa's day appeared routine because that was how Vanessa lived. At about 5:30 p.m., she attended a business dinner with a woman named Heidi Latham. The meal involved a new venture Vanessa had recently acquired, a franchise of the National League of Junior Cotillion, an etiquette program serving middle school students. Even while her marriage was quietly strained, Vanessa continued building, launching projects, and pressing ahead exactly as she always had. Following dinner, Vanessa and Heidi Latham drove to the Saluda Mountain Lodge, her family's property, where Vanessa served as general manager. The two women intended to spend the night there. When they reached the lodge around 8 p.m., Heidi Latham noticed something. A red pickup truck was sitting beside the lodge's breezeway. Travis McGraw was already there. Sometime that night, Travis departed the lodge to bring Vanessa food and a drink. It was a simple gesture. He had been doing things like that for her since the earliest part of their relationship. Later, Heidi Latham retired to her own room for the night. It would be the final documented moment of Vanessa Mintz alive and well, spending an ordinary evening with a friend, having dinner, developing another business, and working at the family lodge she loved. During the early morning of February 19th, everything changed. Heidi Latham awoke to 2 loud whooshing sounds, separated by slightly more than a minute. She was unable to fall asleep again. About 30 to 45 minutes later, she got out of bed and departed the lodge. As she left, she noticed that same red pickup truck still sitting in the same spot beside the breezeway. Around 9 a.m., Vanessa's daughter, Jessica Freeman, reached the lodge to relieve her mother for the morning shift. Almost at once, she realized something was wrong. The blinds were shut. The closed sign remained displayed, hours beyond the lodge's expected opening time. The office door stood open. Jessica entered the manager's apartment. In the rear bedroom, she discovered her mother. Vanessa Mintz had been shot twice. One wound was in her right arm, the other in her head. She was 53 years old. Initially, the scene appeared to be a robbery that had gone wrong. The lodge's cash drawer stood open and was empty. About $200 was gone. Yet almost immediately, that explanation began unraveling. There was no evidence of forced entry anywhere on the property. No shattered windows, no damaged locks. Nothing indicated that an outsider had forced their way inside. And although the cash drawer had been emptied, valuable jewelry, including an expensive ring Vanessa had removed the previous night, remained untouched in plain sight. To Special Agent Steve Maudlin, none of it made sense. Saluda Mountain Lodge wasn't somewhere an unknown stranger would casually find himself in the middle of the night. It was isolated enough that a random stranger would not wander onto the property without reason or familiarity. The setting and circumstances made the supposed robbery increasingly difficult to accept from the beginning. Investigators were already facing questions that the scene itself could not answer. The apartment, too, was remarkably tidy for a scene supposedly involving a violent robbery homicide. Then investigators discovered the evidence that would eventually tear the entire story apart. A fired Winchester 12-gauge shotgun shell rested on the bedroom floor beside Vanessa's shoes. The autopsy established that Vanessa had sustained 2 shotgun wounds. One struck her right arm, deemed a defensive injury, while the other struck her head. Pellets and shell wadding taken from both wounds matched 12-gauge Winchester shotgun shells. They were the same type as the shell recovered from the bedroom floor. Investigators now had a body, a staged robbery that defied explanation, and one shotgun shell that hardly belonged to some stranger who had disappeared into the night. Their next step would redirect the case completely, and it originated with someone no one initially viewed as a suspect. In the days after Vanessa's death, Travis McGraw did something that, on the surface, resembled the conduct of an innocent man. He willingly agreed to let investigators search his truck. Inside, they found firearms, magazines, ammunition, and 12-gauge shotgun shells. Travis went further. He also voluntarily surrendered firearms from his home, including a camouflage Mossberg Model 500A 12-gauge shotgun. For his father, Willie McGraw, that was evidence of innocence. Why would a former police officer, someone who knew forensic evidence better than nearly anyone, willingly give investigators the exact weapon that might convict him? Willie described his son as arrogant and high-strung, but maintained he wasn't foolish enough to leave such obvious evidence behind. Yet SBI firearms examiner Shane Green conducted tests that would be devastating. He test-fired shells from Travis's Mossberg and compared their markings with the spent shell recovered from the lodge bedroom floor. His finding was clear. The shell discovered at the crime scene had been fired from Travis McGraw's shotgun. CBS later reported Green characterized the match as 100% certain, a degree of certainty that would eventually become a key issue in Travis's appeal. The theory of a stranger carrying a gun was finished. The shell lying on the floor, the clue that should have implicated a robber, instead led straight to Vanessa's husband. As investigators examined Travis's life more closely after Vanessa's death, they discovered Mary Beth Fisher and the ultimatum she had issued just 2 days before Vanessa was killed. If the shell was incriminating, Travis's actions during the hours and days following Vanessa's death made the situation far worse. At 7:53 p.m., that same day Vanessa's body was found, Travis emailed his Air Force Reserve commander, Major William Boshin. The subject concerned a $100,000 service members group life insurance policy on Vanessa's life. Major Boshin later testified that the request shocked him. The inquiry arrived roughly 10 to 12 hours after Vanessa's death became known. Travis would later say he asked only because he was concerned about paying funeral expenses. Then there was Mary Beth Fisher. CBS reported that following Vanessa's death, Travis wrote Fisher and portrayed the killing as though a stranger had entered, robbed the cash drawer, and shot Vanessa. Fisher testified that she struggled to believe Travis could have done it, even though the timing of her ultimatum and Vanessa's death less than 48 hours afterward remained troubling in her mind. Perhaps the most disturbing detail came next. After Vanessa died, but before her funeral, Travis arranged a trip to Tybee Island, Georgia, with Fisher. Fisher located a rental house online. Travis gave her his credit card for the deposit. She eventually canceled the trip because she said something felt wrong. After Travis's arrest, the letters continued. Fisher testified that Travis repeatedly wrote her from jail, apologizing for deceiving her, declaring his love, including sexual content, and saying he would be financially comfortable after his release. He asked her to wait for him. On the surface, a grieving widower was mourning his wife. Behind the scenes, he was arranging vacations and sending love letters to his secret girlfriend before his wife's burial. Travis was arrested 4 days after Vanessa's death and formally indicted for first-degree murder on July 25, 2011. He remained jailed for roughly 13 months until his family secured a $750,000 bond, which allowed him to await trial outside jail. For Vanessa's daughters, those months became another kind of torment. CBS reported they encountered Travis around the community, in local stores, as the case continued for years. Each sighting reminded them anew that the man accused of murdering their mother remained free. Before trial, prosecutors offered Travis a plea agreement, second-degree murder, carrying a reported sentence of 16 to 20 years. By all accounts, he seemed prepared to accept it. Then, in March 2014, just before the hearing to finalize the plea was scheduled to begin, Travis withdrew. Local reports said the decision stunned everyone inside the courtroom, reportedly including his own defense attorney. Prosecutors pulled the offer. The case would now proceed to trial for first-degree murder, with no agreement remaining. Proceedings opened in Polk County Superior Court in May 2014. Taking the stand for his defense, Travis relied heavily upon his resume, Air Force medals, years in public service, an account of the shotgun shell. He said he had gone target shooting near Asheville Airport earlier that day, slipped spent shells into his pocket, then changed clothes inside the lodge bedroom. According to Travis, the shell must have dropped from his pants. Yet cell phone records reportedly placed Travis's phone nowhere close to the area where he said he had been shooting. His son, Taylor McGraw, 17 when the murder occurred and about 20 during trial, testified that he and his father had slept at home that night, approximately 12 miles away from the lodge. Taylor explained that the family dog was deaf, but highly sensitive to vibrations and would have awakened him had his father left the house. During cross-examination, however, Taylor conceded something that effectively weakened his own account. He was an exceptionally deep sleeper. At the same time, Heidi Latham's story, the red pickup by the breezeway, the booming noises overnight, and the truck remaining there when she departed, all conflicted directly with Travis's assertion that he had stayed home all night, 12 miles away. On the stand, Travis acknowledged he had never told Mary Beth Fisher that he was married. He acknowledged loving her. He acknowledged wanting a life with her. Yet he flatly denied murdering Vanessa. On June 4, 2014, jurors returned their verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder, Travis McGraw received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Psychological analysis. What makes Travis McGraw particularly unsettling isn't simply the act he allegedly committed. It's the ease with which he maintained two entirely separate emotional worlds. From a psychological perspective, this behavior resembles what is often called compartmentalization, paired with image management. Travis constructed his public identity around roles associated with trust. Police officer, firefighter, EMT, military reservist. These were more than occupations. They were positions society teaches people to instinctively trust. When Vanessa's daughter said her mother admired Travis for being a civil servant, she was pointing to precisely the kind of halo effect such roles can produce. Yet people who knew Travis described another side operating beneath that image. Special Agent Steve Maudlin summarized it plainly. Travis had many secrets and an entirely different life. Mary Beth Fisher remembered him as charming and warm. Those were the very same qualities Vanessa's family described. He wasn't showing two separate personalities to two separate women. Instead, he showed both the same charming, attentive persona while concealing the other relationship altogether. His refusal to introduce Fisher to his children is especially revealing. It indicates that Travis wasn't simply acting chaotically. He was deliberately controlling the boundaries between his compartments, keeping each relationship protected from exposure to the other. Then came the insurance email. Sending that message approximately 10 to 12 hours after his wife's body had been discovered wasn't merely suspicious. Psychologically, it points towards someone whose thoughts had already shifted beyond the emotional event and toward logistics and personal interests. at a time when a truly grieving spouse would ordinarily still be in shock. The same pattern appears in arranging a vacation with his girlfriend before his wife's funeral. These weren't the behaviors of someone working through grief. They were the behaviors of someone carrying out a plan. Finally, rejecting a plea agreement not once but reportedly twice, choosing instead to testify, emphasize his medals, and stake everything on a jury accepting his story, suggests profound confidence in his ability to persuade. Throughout his life, Travis's charm and credibility had opened doors. In the courtroom, for the first and only time, they didn't. Thanks for watching Crime Chapter 51. If you enjoyed today's cases, let us know in the comments which one stayed with you the most, and tell us where you're watching from. If you love long-form true crime documentaries, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new chapter. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you in the next case.